a tiny lead amulet with no archaeological context, no associated grave, no coins, no dated building. And yet runologists can still tell when it may have been written. How do we do it? Hello, rune scholar. I'm the modern Erilar. Last time we explored how different decisions can change the translation of an inscription. Today we're asking a different question. If the words don't tell us when an inscription was carved, can the shapes of the runes themselves? The answer is yes, because rune forms preserve evidence beyond the words that they spell. Today we're going to look at the Rutsker Amulet. It belongs to a group of medieval lead amulets which can be linked to a period from approximately 1050 to 1400 of the Common Era. Given what we know or can observe, can we make that date a little more precise? Like many of the lead amulets found on Bornholm, this one was a stray find. That means it wasn't discovered in a grave or near a building that can tell us when it was deposited. Without that datable archaeological context, our analysis must rely on the inscription itself. Normally, we'd look for clues in the language, even though linguistic dating can sometimes give us only broad clues. Unfortunately, the plate must have been bent in the middle, twice on each axis, so that it consists of 4 very thin layers, which can no longer be separated from each other. The beginning and approximately half of all of the 6 lines now seen on the small plate are no longer visible, 3 on the A side and 3 on the B side. What remains of this inscription doesn't make clear linguistic sense in either Latin or Old Danish, so language gives us very little to work with. The actual formation of the runes can, however, to some extent, tell us when the inscription was written. What runes can you see that may help us date this inscription? The T runes, identifiable within this inscription, in the very center of side A, each have a single diagonal branch, which identifies this inscription as being short-twig. Could short-twig runes give us a date? 2 carved lengths of wood from the Viking settlement at Haithabu show inscriptions using short-twig runes. This one includes a full Futhark in short-twig runes. Short-twig runes aren't all written exactly the same way. Some, especially the nasal A and the B runes, can point in different directions while still representing the same rune. The twigs can also appear on either side of this stave as long as they maintain these directions. For example, the nasal A can either be up and to the left, or down and to the right, or fully cross the stave. And all 3 variations indicate the same short twig nasal A or O rune. In the top row of side B of the Rutsker Amulet, we can see that there are both short twig A runes and double twigged nasal A or O runes present on this amulet. So we can confirm that we are looking at an inscription written in the Younger Futhark. The Haithabu find is broadly dated, though, to any but the last 50 years of the occupation of the site, so the 200-year span isn't particularly helpful in determining a chronology of the development of short-twig runes in Denmark. Rune scholars can't agree on exactly when the divergence between long branch and short twig Futharks occurred, partly because the dating of some of our best evidence discovered so far doesn't give us much to go on. So we've at least confirmed that the Rutsker inscription uses short twig Younger Futhark. That's useful, but it still leaves us with a very large possible date range. We know that lead amulets started to be used around 1050, so the fact that this is a short twig inscription doesn't help us enough to start shrinking our possible date window of 1050 to 1400. We need more evidence. Toward the bottom right of side B, one of our Tyr runes looks very unique. It has either a crossbar or a dot on its stave, and this identifies it as a dotted or stung tir rune. Could dotted runes narrow the date? Dotted runes restored distinctions between consonant sounds that Younger Futhark had merged when written. In this case, a dotted tir was introduced to distinguish a D sound from a T sound. Stung runes first appeared during the Viking Age, though only stung is for E, stung kaun for G, and stung ur for Y were used to any great degree before the medieval period. The earliest dotted runes in Scandinavia show up in Denmark, on runestones from the 980s in southeast Jylland at the trading centres of Århus and Haithabu, and in Skåne, which was then part of the Danish kingdom rather than Sweden, of which it is a part today. The Århus Mask Stone, on one of its text-only sides, has representations of the three most common dotted runes. In Denmark, stung tir was introduced on coins minted for Sven Estridsen between 1065 and 1076, so that starts to push the earliest possible date for our Rutsker inscription later than 1065, and this is a good start to narrow our date range. What other rune forms can help us? We can also see in the middle row of side A that the inscription distinguishes between different short A vowels, this one and this one here. We can observe a one-sided short twig A rune here, as well as a version of an A rune where the twig fully crosses the stave almost horizontally. The presence of both single-sided and fully crossing short A runes usually indicates written differentiation between a and a sounds, when earlier inscriptions often used only a single written vowel for both sounds. So can vowel distinctions narrow our date further? This characteristic does even better. The distinction between these vowel sounds probably developed in Norway and Sweden in the first half of the 12th century, spreading to Denmark in the later 12th century. So our inscription should therefore be no earlier than the late 12th century. Returning to that middle row of side A, we can also see that two T runes appear together. So what about doubled consonants? Now we're moving into the 13th century, when we see rune writers regularly start to incorporate doubled consonants into their spelling to indicate a longer consonant sound. This technique was rarely used before this time, but it was used, for example, in Old English inscriptions, though the sound change in the group of languages we would call Old Norse had occurred by the 4th century of the Common Era. Gemination of consonants lengthens their pronunciation in a way that changes the meaning of the word. For example, in modern English, striped is different to stripped, and desert is different to dessert. Richard Page, in his study of doubled runes, thought that if the early rune masters used only single runes for long or repeated sounds, later practitioners, becoming aware of the scribal use of double letters, may have tried to adopt the practice. So this medieval change may indicate the influence of Latin literacy on runic usage. During the Viking Age, words like theta would be spelled with a single tir rune, but by the 13th century and later, this word is spelled with two tir runes. In some inscriptions, this was accomplished by writing the rune twice, while in other inscriptions, the twig of the rune would be written twice onto a single stave, creating what we would call a bind rune. So far, we've gone from knowing only that this is medieval to narrowing a possible date for the Rutsker Amulet by almost 4 centuries, and we've done it without understanding a single complete sentence on the amulet. And one final clue pushes us even further. These unusually long, one-sided branches on the År and Nauð runes are distinctive because the twig extends much longer than earlier single-sided short-twig runes, almost to the foot of the stave. Based on the presence of these two runes, runologists can therefore estimate this inscription to be from the 14th or 15th centuries, and that is our current best estimate, as of summer 2026, for the date of this amulet. Even when we can't read the intended message of an inscription, we can still estimate when it may have been written. That's because the rune forms preserve the history of the writing system itself. So how do we know when all of these rune changes took place? In our next episode, let's take a look at how runologists have thought about how to understand chronological developments in the way that runes were written. Until then, thank you for reading the runes with me, the Modern Erilar.